welcome to Tell Muses, a podcast all about storytelling with storytellers, by storytellers, for storytellers, and for anyone interested in the wonderful art of storytelling. Today, we've got with us the wonderful Lisa Schneideu. Hello, Lisa. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
Hello and welcome, Lisa. Very good to be with you. So, Simone is in Italy. I'm in Greece. Where are you located right now?
I am in Devon in southwest
Mhm.
England, and it's I think it's going to be a scorcher today. I think we're actually strangely going to have a hot day, which is quite unusual here.
Ooh.
So it's all a bit strange, but it's rather beautiful here as well. I'm just on the edge of Dartmoor National Park, and I live in a little town which looks right out to the hills. It's great.
That's lovely. Speaking of little towns, Simona, this season 2 of our podcast is under the wing of Gawi, aka Get a Word in Edgeways, which is a lovely little festival that takes place every October in the very beautiful little town slash village of Matchwenlock, border with Wales, but on the English side. So people are it is highly recommended for people to visit. I don't know. Have you been there, Lisa?
I went to a festival at the Edge when it was there, but I've never actually made it to Gowie. I've had other things going on, but hopefully one day I'll make it.
Let's hope we'll meet there then. But you are going to the East Anglian, are you not?
Not this year. I
Ah,
loved it last year. I really did, but it's on the midsummer this year. Unfortunately, I've got some other
yeah,
things
indeed.
on that weekend. So there's a big festival down in Plymouth, which is a big city down this way. There's a big festival of the sea and of fish, and I'm
Mm.
doing some storytelling there on that weekend instead. But East Anglian Storytelling Festival will be wonderful. It's looking
I'm
good.
taking my daughter this year, Lisa,
Oh, that's lovely.
my 11-and-a-half-year-old for the first time. Ooh.
Make sure she sits round a fire at the end when everyone is sitting there telling stories late into the evening,
Yeah,
and
I'm
it's
doing
all
the
very informal.
story round
Really
around the
good.
fire pit. Yeah,
Yeah.
she will be there. So, for people listening who don't know, could you please tell us a little bit about who Lisa Schneideu is?
Yeah, sure. So I've been storytelling for about 20 years. I've been full-time storyteller and writer for about 5 years now. Um, I didn't originally work as a storyteller. I originally trained as an ecologist, and that work took me all over Britain, all over the country, working on nature conservation projects. So, trying to work to get a little bit more wildlife in the countryside, trying to work with farmers to get more nature on farmland, that kind of work, and all manner of different projects and organisations within it. So, for about the first 25 years of my career, because I'm actually about 105, the first 25 years were really all about science and nature advice and lobbying and fundraising and projects out in the field. But gradually, as I got more into storytelling, it took me over, as storytelling tends to, right? It takes over your life a little bit and you see everything through a story lens. And eventually, I changed careers, I guess is the way you would say. It's not really a career, is it? It's a, how is it? They say it's more of a way of life. That's nice.
How did your passion for storytelling start? How did you get into storytelling?
Very gradually, actually. The first story that I had a go at telling was part of a group I was working with. It was good old Baba Yaga. So I heard people tell stories occasionally, but it wasn't until I was living in Edinburgh. I was living in Scotland. I was working with the Scottish Wildlife Trust. And on the Royal Mile, one of the most historic streets in Edinburgh, just on a little road off that, there's a little pub, and it's quite a shabby little pub. And in the upstairs room of the little pub, every month, they used to have a story night. And people would turn up from everywhere. students or people coming off the boats at Leith, or all kinds of different people from different walks of life. And they would pass a hat round, and everyone who wanted to tell a story would put their name in the hat. It was a very informal story night. And I stumbled across this. I'm not quite even sure how, but I used to go along just to listen because the stories were extraordinary. It wasn't all traditional tales. It was a mixture of real life and historical and things just completely made up and improvised, and traditional story as well. And I just loved it. It really, really grabbed me. And so, of course, it's a short step from that, isn't it, to having a go at storytelling. When I left Edinburgh, I moved down to the southwest then. I moved to Somerset. And I joined a little story group out on the Somerset Levels, the Flatlands, run by Sharon Jackstis and Jem Dick in Langport. Just in a little pub every month, and we used to go along and try and take stories. And I gradually got involved in different story groups. And it went from there, to be honest with you. I was working for the Wildlife Trust at the time, and I was inevitably interested in the interface between how storytelling could be used and nature work. And I went along to see some storytellers that were hired to go on nature reserves at open days and things like that. And I was quite surprised. The stories they were telling were really great stories, but there weren't really many British stories at all. They were all tales of Coyote from America or Anansi from Africa. All of these, you may be very familiar with these kinds of stories of shape-shifting creatures and tricksters and all of these things. And while they were great, and they were certainly really good for entertaining the kids, they weren't to do with the nature that was around them. And that piqued my interest. And that really set me off on the path that eventually would lead to the research I've done and the stories I've worked with and the books I've written. A lot
Talking
of work.
of,
Sorry?
would you like to tell us a little bit about your books, please?
Well, yes, I mean, that question about stories and where are the little tales of the places that we know and the places where we are inevitably took me to researching folk tales and folk tales of nature. And we actually had Shonali Cumbers and Simon Hayward down in Devon for some kind of weekend or workshop, and we were talking about it. And Shonali and Simon said, well, why don't you write a book? Why don't you make this a project? Why don't you really do some research behind it, see what you can find? And they put me in touch with the History Press. And that's how Botanical Folktales started. A lot of that was also really to do with when my mum died. And she was the one who taught me the wildflowers when I was little, along with her mum. It was kind of a tradition in the family. I think the boys were less interested somehow. Possibly boys were more into birds, girls were more into plants. That's really cliched, isn't it? But it was when we lost my mum very suddenly that I also thought to myself, there's some things here that I learned that I want to pass on. And some curiosity for those little things of the wayside, those little bits of nature in ordinary life that I wanted to connect with storytelling. And that really helped to shape the project. And Botanical Folktales came out in 2018. That feels like the Stone Age now. It's a long time ago.
Not so long, really. You know, Simona is a huge fan of yours. If I didn't get you to this podcast, she would have killed me. So you were one of the pioneers working with plants and nature of your land, right, Lisa?
Not necessarily plants and nature, but I hope that I've contributed something to do with the stories.
Yeah.
I think that's the crucial thing.
Mm.
I mean, when you work in nature conservation, there are amazing figures who have done research, who have explored and exposed and publicised the importance of wild plants. Anyone from Arthur Tansley, who was a very, very famous ecologist in the earlier part of the 20th century, right the way through to Richard Mabey, who's done a lot of work on the more contemporary folklore of plants. He published a book called Flora Britannica in the 90s that was a groundbreaker. But even people like the Reverend Keble Martin, who in the 1960s produced the first ever colour flora, which we had a very well-thumbed copy on my mum's shelf. That was a groundbreaking thing in the 1960s. He drew all the colour plates himself of all of the plants. And I think the Duke of Edinburgh was involved in publishing it, because at that time it was a very expensive thing to do. The publishing industry hadn't got to the point where it could reproduce things in colour very well. And so you get all of these stages of the discovery of plants and the identification and the physiology and the ecology of plants. But looking at folk tales is slightly different. As a scientist, I think the older I get, the worse a scientist I am, because inevitably my perception of plants is tangled up in these very human constructs of how does that plant make us feel? What stories does that plant feature in? What qualities does that plant have? And there's some really interesting edges there if you're a scientist. Because when you're trained as a scientist, you are told categorically everything is about physical evidence and what you can see and what you can observe. Do not anthropomorphize. Do not give these other species human characteristics that you're projecting onto them, frankly, because you feel you need to. It's nothing about them. They are there in their own right. And that's all very well, but it doesn't really help with our relationship with them. You can observe something and go, oh, that's deeply interesting that subspecies X has got blah, blah. And I've lost you already. It gets deeply dull after a while.
No, absolutely not. No, no, no. We're very into what you're saying. But in folk tales, you found the plants being metamorphosized. Is that it? Well, were they treated that way, or were they just instruments in, I don't know, a large cauldron producing different physical effects as scientists would have it?
The plants have their own agency, right? Yeah,
Hmm.
it's interesting in stories. As ever with traditional tales, certainly the traditional tales of Britain and Ireland that I've been looking into, they come to us in fragments, and sometimes they make no sense. And it's very easy to draw conclusions out of them that may not have been intended or even thought about. We will view them with a very different lens now to perhaps the way they might have been told in the past. Can I tell you a story to illustrate that? Would that be all right? Does that
We'd
fit into the
kill for a
podcast?
story, right, Simona? Oh, yes, please.
Definitely.
So this might be a story that you know. It's quite a well-known little folk tale, and it was collected by a folklorist who's got stories in her own right, a woman called Ruth Tongue. And she was based in Somerset in the Quantock Hills in the kind of mid-20th century. She used to do a lot of work with Catherine Briggs, very eminent folklorist. And Ruth Tongue is quite controversial in her own right. Some people think she made quite a few things up. We don't know. Frankly, I don't care. It's about what the stories tell us. And this story, Ruth Tongue says, came from Warwickshire. And I'll tell you my own version, because we all work up these things, don't we? And we all have own versions. And I guess in my mind's eye, my own version comes from somewhere around 1300. It's, really early on, somewhere in the medieval period. And it begins in a little cottage at the edge of the woods, as these stories often start. And in this cottage was a grandmother and a granddaughter. And their business was spinning wool. That's what they did. That's how they kept themselves alive. And what they would do is to go to market every week. They would sell the wool that they had spun. They would buy more fleece and they would buy food, and then they would carry on with their work. That was the routine that the grandmother and the granddaughter got into. The market was a little way away, and they walked to market and back, and that was as fine as far as it went. But if you were that granddaughter standing on the threshold of that tiny little cottage and looking out of the door, you would have seen two different places in front of you. There was one place where this girl could go, and there was one place where this girl could not go. The place where she could go, on the right-hand side as she looked out, was all open land, and much of it was tilled for crops, and it was used for growing food. And at the end of the day, that's quite often how villages started. It was everyone who lived round about, getting together, managing the land together, growing the food, and surviving. On the left-hand side, past a great big new earth bank that had been built all around it, there was a woodland. And the girl had never been in this woodland. And there were 3 reasons for that. The first reason was that they, them, people, said that in the middle of this wood there was a great oak tree. And the oak tree was a very stern oak tree, and it ruled that place, and it doled out judgment, and it did not suffer fools. That was the first reason not to go into the woods. The second reason not to go into the woods was because they weren't allowed, because nobody was allowed in the woods. This was the time of forest law. And the original meaning of the word forest was that it belonged to the king and the men of the king, and no one was allowed in those woods, even if they were starving, to get themselves some dinner, to catch a deer or a rabbit or a hare. If they went into those woods, they would, if they were caught, probably be hung for it. That's a good reason not to go in the woods, right? But there was a third reason why this girl could not go in the woods. The lord of that time, the man who had been asked by the king to look after all the lands in that place, the lord was a bad man. And everybody round those parts knew that he didn't only go hunting for deer. He didn't only go hunting for wild boar and for wolf. He went hunting for young women. And everybody knew that if he managed to hunt down a young woman, then he would have his way with her. And more often than not, her body was found later on with its head separated from its body. That was a really good reason not to go in the woods. In fact, most people who had daughters, well, they either moved away or sent their daughters away because of this lord's reputation. And because he was the lord, the king believed him. The king did not believe the people, and so he was allowed to continue. Well, this young girl stayed in the cottage. It was her grandmother who walked across the fields and round the woods to market every week. She stayed hidden. But there was a time when the grandmother was ill. She could not even get out of bed, and so the granddaughter had to go to market that day. There was no way around it. They had no food left. They had some wool to sell. They had no other money. They needed more fleece. She had to walk to market. And so there were many tears. And there was a great black cloak with a big hood that the grandmother put on her granddaughter. And many blessings were given. And the grandmother said, "Walk around the edge of the woods. Let the trees cover you as much as they can. And let us hope that he is not out hunting here today." And so the granddaughter set off with a basket of yarn over her arm, and she started to walk along the edge of those woods. And it felt as if she was being watched. She might have been being watched by the creatures in the woodland. She might have been being watched by the birds in the sky and by the tiny little creatures all around her feet. Who knows? But she walked, and she walked, and she was just turning the corner of the woods, just starting to stride across the open fields towards the market, when she heard the sound of a hunting horn. And the hunting horn sounded 3 sharp blasts, and she looked behind her, and there, silhouetted on the hill, there was the Lord. She knew it was the Lord, because he was famously a very, very small man on a very, very big horse, and he had all kinds of fawning followers on their horses behind him. And she knew instantly, in the way that you do, just by sensing it. He had seen her, and she now had to run. And if she ran over the open fields, well, he would catch her quickly. He would catch her in a kind of pincer movement, coming down from off the hill. There was only one place she could escape to, and that was into the woods. And so she scrambled up that great earth bank, and she tumbled down the other side, and she found herself in the place so close to where she lived, and yet the place that she had never been to. And if she had had time to stop and admire it, she would have found a very different place. It was high spring. The bluebells were everywhere. Their scent was hanging above the ground. The wren calling in the tree was so loud. And yet she had to run all the way through, crunching through twigs that were loud and rang around the woods, and she was sure that the Lord would hear them. And she had to tumble around ferns and get her way around bramble patches, and she just ran. She thought it was the direction of the market. She had no idea, and there were no paths. But eventually she did come to a great clearing. And there was only one thing in this great clearing in the woods, and it was a tree bigger than any she had ever seen. It was a huge oak, and the oak, well, its branches, they curved back down to the ground, so it looked as if it was hugging the ground all around it. And she stopped, and she looked up and thought, now I'm for it. This must be it. This must be the great oak, the stern oak, the judgmental one. And she did the only thing she thought would be appropriate. She curtsied to the tree, and she looked up and said, please let me through. Please look after me. And did the tree reply? No, trees don't talk, do they? Well, at least not in this story. But yet she felt somehow that it was all right. She felt that it was all right to duck underneath those great branches and to carry on running. And of course she wanted to waste no time, so she did, and she ran all the way through the woods, back out the other side of the woods. Across the fields she made it to market, and she made it safely out of this story. But what about the Lord? Well, the Lord had seen her, and the hunting horn was blaring, and the horses' hooves were clattering, and he made it into the woods with all his men behind him. And he rode as swiftly as he could. He loved this sport. His day was looking promising, until he got to that clearing. Now, some people say that he stopped and observed the tree and was not impressed. Some people say that he didn't stop, and he carried on riding, and he had not judged those great boughs hanging down over the ground. Whichever of those was the truth, the Lord found a great bough hitting his head, smack. And that bough knocked him straight off his horse, and as he fell to the ground, his neck snapped in two, and the horse ran off, and the Lord's body was left splayed underneath that oak tree. And then came the followers. And they came to the clearing. They saw their lord dead on the ground. They could see exactly what had happened. And they surrounded that oak tree. Out came the axes. Out came the swords. It's about time you were taught a lesson. And they began to lay into that tree and to hack at the trunk and the bark and the branches and the leaves. And did the tree talk? Trees don't talk, do they? Do you know, those men were so intent on their destruction, they didn't notice until it was too late. The other oak trees surrounding them and moving in, closer and closer around them. And with a rustle and a groan and a creak, those oak trees closed in further. Until the men were trapped, there was no escape. The oak trees closed in further still, until there was just arms and legs sticking out here and there. And then the oak trees closed in further still. Until in that clearing in the woods there was only one thing. It was a great oak tree. It was 3 times as wide as the grandmother's cottage. And there were no men ever to be seen in those woods again. And that's it. Oh, that's quite a strong story, isn't it, for early on a Friday morning?
A very nice
brilliant.
story indeed.
And so vivid. I could see all the details and imagine the woods, the fields, everything. Thank you for the story.
There's actually a recording of Ruth Tongue telling that somewhere on YouTube. You can find it. And she's got the most brilliant accent. And she keeps going, "That were all right, wasn't it?" And she kind of stops the story every so often. She tells it a lot shorter than I do.
What is the name of the story?
It's just called The Wonderful Wood. But yeah, what do you think? Where does that story take you right now? What's going on in that story? You asked about plants, and do they have their own character? What do you think?
Well, oak trees have been in so many stories and legends and myths, like, well, usually not the main character of the story, but certainly play a big part in it. And usually they're there to help the hero or the heroine in their journey to adulthood, usually, or yeah, because this process is somehow a significant metaphor to a person's going through different stages in life, right? Exiting childhood and entering the next stage. And they have been sacred in religions as well.
Yeah.
So they presumably they must have been very highly esteemed by people, not just for their fruit or for more gifts they would have to offer. What do you think, Simona?
I don't know. It was when I listened to the story, I often when I listen to stories, I make connections to what's going on or what went on in my life. And I don't know, while I was listening to the story, I connected it to something that has been going on close to where I live for the past few years, which is that they're building a new big road. It's a big highway, and they cut down big part of woodland that I loved walking in. And it was exactly the kind of woodland that you described, Lisa, because in spring you went there and it was full of flowers, and it was like no, it was magical, and they cut down the trees, and I could see the lorries taking away the trees from the forest, because it's on a road where I frequently pass, and I don't know, it felt like I connected it to this fact because it's like these men they got mad at the tree for doing nothing, just standing there, and it's something that I've seen lots of times in the past few years with people saying, "Oh, we need to cut down that forest, that woodland, because it's useless there, and we need this big highway." Uh, PS, we don't need it. We
Yeah,
really don't need
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
live in the most industrialized part of Europe, really. So yeah, I connected it to this fact. I didn't really connect it to other folk tales. I love oak trees, but I connected it to this fact because that's what my brain does when when I listen to stories.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You've actually come up with um an image and a kind of corresponding story of abuse of nature, haven't you? A destruction of nature, and that certainly is a thread in the story. There's such a multi-layered little folktale, this one, for me. It has such images of enclosure in it. So the ludicrous situation where the grandmother and the granddaughter are in a cottage next to a beautiful wood, and yet they're not allowed in it. They're starving. They're subsisting week to week. They're really struggling, and yet they cannot take anything from the land right next to them. That is a ludicrous situation to start with, and then you have this kind of almost cartoon pompous lord who is abusing his power.
I loved the very little man on a very big horse,
I
you know.
couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. It just, but you know, there was a point round about the 1300 mark in England where a third of England was forested. So a third of England, in the original use of the word forest, which meant enclosed for the king or enclosed for the lord, the people could not get access to a third of the land unless it was within very strict laws about, even to the point that you could only take so much firewood if you were only a certain kind of person. It is cutting people off from the land they live with, and it is cutting off the relationship between them and that land and those other things. It is almost the ultimate in control of everyday life. So you have these really violent images in this story, which actually happened and which still do happen an awful lot today. So we have a situation today, we've been doing quite a lot of work with the Right to Roam campaign. And at the moment, people in England can generally only access about 8% of England because there is so much private land and there's only a system of footpaths, and the access rights are really only on very limited common land now. That is a remnant of that system that started with William the Conqueror. So you've got all that going on with the story. Then you've got this this situation with the Lord. When I first started telling this story, that whole thing about him hunting young women, it's like, wow, that's quite extreme. That sounds really a little bit over the top in this folktale. If I were telling that folktale to a mixed audience, I would really tone that bit down, obviously.
Yeah.
I would do what storytellers do and tone it down. But I was telling this story a couple of weeks back, and I just suddenly stopped and thought, what situation do we know in everyday life today where there is a very, very powerful rich man and his counterparts who have been abusing young women?
Yeah.
I suddenly realised this is an Epstein story.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you know the way that folk tales keep changing and your relationship with them keeps changing. And that was like, oh, well. So let's just leave that one there, because it's a very good example, I think, of how these little traditional folk tales are very, very current and very relevant. But the last thing I want to say about that story is to go back to the notion of nature having agency in a story. Um, so I love the way the justice is dealt out in that story. She has to give some respect to this oak. She has heard about it. She's heard the stories about it. It's big and forbidding, and it has seen a lot. So there's a little story. There's a little saying. I don't know if you've heard. An oak tree takes 300 years to grow, 300 years to live, and 300 years to die. So they can grow to over 1,000 years old. Imagine all the things that oak tree's seen. That's mind blowing. So the tree certainly, there is some kind of, okay, it's okay to carry on. That might well have been in her head. It might have been real. But then when the Lord comes along and that justice is dealt out not only to him, but to his fellows, it's almost as a result of their own actions.
Yeah.
So he is either so blind to the place that he doesn't judge the branches properly, or kind of a big old branch falls on his head. Who knows? But, that'll learn him, kind of thing. And he's dead. And then the others come along, and they are so busy being violent they don't notice themselves being swallowed up. And it's all done so quietly and so beautifully. I love that because it talks about the woodland not only as one tree, the woodland is a whole network of other trees. And it speaks in some way to those things that people are now discovering about the way that trees communicate, and the way that that web of life in a woodland is not only the trees, it's all the other things that we see above ground. It's the mycorrhizae and the root networks and everything that we don't see but are still there. And
You
to
know,
me, that speaks to that. Yeah.
um, I was thinking of linguistics, obviously, because this is what we do, Simona and I. And we have a modern Greek term for the oak tree, which is velanidia, nothing to do with it. But the ancient Greek word was dris. So supposedly inside the oak trees, there would be, especially the very massive ones, the ones that would have lived many, many years, there would be a spirit inhabiting them, which would be the dris, or, the female
A
spirit.
dryad.
A
Yeah.
dryad, yeah. And supposedly, I don't know if that's a thing, but it sounds like it. It sounds like it has a good foundation, a logical one. Druid would come from the same root,
Yes,
right?
it
Like,
is. It does. People of the oak,
mm.
or yes, oak grove. Yes.
Yeah, and there's this very nice myth about people getting greedy, especially people in power when it comes to nature. The story of not Erich Sichton, what's the guy's name? Evristeas.
Go on.
Okay, so there's this very greedy king who's not a king, he's like a lord of the land, and he wants to build this massive banquet table to decorate his new palace and have everybody in power come over as guests and marvel at his wealth. So he orders his some servants to go and cut down the very sacred tree of Hera deep inside the woods, which they are very hesitant of doing because they know the stories, they've heard the stories, and they know there's something really powerful and sacred going on with that particular tree, and he has them whipped. So he forces them to cut down the tree, even though the spirit does manifest and says that they shouldn't. He keeps at it, so they have the tree cut down. So then the curse of Hera falls upon him, which is hunger. Hunger comes from a very far away, deserted place, cold, cold place up in the north. It travels all the way to the south of Europe, to Greece, and enters that lord while he's sleeping. And when he wakes up, in the middle of the night. He's starving, so he asks for food. He has his servants bring him food. So the servants bring him food, and he starts stuffing his face with it, and he can never have enough. This appetite just won't go away. It's huge and it's overwhelming, and it's consuming him. So to cut the long story short, which is a lovely myth, look it up. And then it's not every stairs. Bloody hell. But pardon, I forget that Lord's name, but I will. Harry Sixon could be. Anyway, he ends up eating his own flesh right there at the cut stump of that sacred tree. They found his body half eaten alive, you know.
I
And this
love
is
that story. I've
of
not
course,
heard
it's
that
a
for
great
ages.
metaphor of how it does not only affect our environment, but ourselves as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind
That's
of
an
gory,
extraordinary tale.
but it's very to the point.
No, 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 it's great. It's really good. And it's it's interesting, isn't it? All these stories of abuse of power and things going to almost comic proportions, dark comedy proportions. Um, they are very, very relevant to today. This slight lopsided culture that we have now of consuming and not necessarily valuing leaving things to be enough, or peace, or reflection, or community. Everything seems to be about individual and consumption. And I think these stories are all very relevant.
So, what are you doing nowadays, my love? Well, how are you involved in this environmentalist storytelling, trying to warn people and to remind them of who we were or who we should be? What do you do about
I'm reminded of another myth of Cassandra. So, I mean, I've been working with folktales and story and environment now in lots of different ways for a long time, and I went full time about 5 years ago. So I spend quite a lot of my time working on different projects. Some of my time working on one-off storytellings and performance and different shows, and some of my time still writing. That's a mashup of what I tend to do at the moment. This week has been a particularly busy week because there has been a festival going on here on Dartmoor. I've been doing some storytelling for. I'm doing a story walk in the woods this afternoon in South Devon, where we will share some tree stories. But we have also been doing some campaigning here on Dartmoor. It's amazing. Once an environmentalist, always an environmentalist. You can give up an environmental job and then you find yourself kind of helping to set up little campaign groups where you live, and it all gets very political. But a whole load of us were up on quite a remote part of Dartmoor a couple of days ago with a great big banner and a whole load of people doing a campaign about bringing back Dartmoor's rainforests. We've got these, you might have seen pictures of it actually, a place called Wistman's Wood, which was, it's one of three tiny fragments of ancient oak woodland left on Dartmoor. And these bits of woodland are very, very high up, and they are growing on scree and stones in really inhospitable areas, which is probably why they still remain. They were difficult to cut down. But when you go into these places, because we're out to the west of the islands here, and it's a much damper climate, these places are dripping with mosses and lichens. They have a very different atmosphere around them. They look really hobbity, to be honest. And the artist who was involved in the Lord of the Rings books and films, Alan Lee, he lives locally to here, and he actually used Wistman's Wood as one of his inspirations for the Ents and the oak woods that were involved there. So we were up in another one of these woodlands a couple of days ago. It took a good hour and a half to get there walking, getting a campaign together, because it's not so much the Lord coming in and chopping these trees down. It's the little nibbling mouths of all the sheep, all the grazing animals that are up on the high ground that stop these trees from regenerating. So you get oak throws out lots of acorns, sheep eat the seedlings, and so it goes on for decades and decades and centuries. And eventually the woodland will die. So we are trying to get some of these areas fenced off so that grazing animals can't get in, and to get the areas extended. And that's quite a political thing to do, because that's not necessarily going to go down well with the people who enjoy their grazing animals being on these places and don't like being told what to do and don't like to be encouraged to put land over to trees that they could graze. So I've been doing a bit of that as well. But it's all of this stuff, whether it's storytelling, whether it's campaigning, whatever it is, it's a really interesting area to work in terms of how we get these messages across and how we genuinely, all of us, are part of this great web of life out there. And how very often these days, all of us, I would include myself in this, feel very disconnected from that nature, and yet we have a yearning for reconnection with that nature. As soon as I mentioned Hobbit and Ent, you two just grinned. You were right there. You know, you were there in Fangorn Forest in the dark and Treebeard looming over you. And we all have these images in our minds and all have these places of dreaming, places of longing to get back to the wild. And some of that is flavoured by the experiences we've had when we've been younger, and some of it is flavoured by the places where we live now and the luck or otherwise that we have of being in places that do still have nature in them. Yeah. And some of it is about our everyday lives and needing to get on and earn a living and do all the things that we do in our lives. And some of it is about just thinking, okay, well, what can I do? What can I do? So being on that journey with storytelling is interesting, and I'd love to know your opinions on this, because it's very easy when you work with a love of nature and work with that with story, for a lot of people to see environmental stuff as preachy, didactic, telling other people what to do. The kind of guilt starts coming up about, well, I can't do anything anyway. There is a gap between us and nature that I think when we're doing environmental storytelling, we need to bridge that gap with humour and with grace and with a light touch. And I've been experimenting for years now with different ways to do this that don't come in with a sledgehammer or a massive campaign banner or a, you know, people want to be told stories primarily to have fun, to be, to have their imaginations sparked. I think provocation is good, but I think too much provocation is I think it's quite counterproductive.
Yeah, you're right. You have to find the silver lining there. But it's not just entertainment, is it? Because, when a story is good, when a story is good when it just keeps working in the back of your head on its own.
Yeah.
You've liked it, and that takes a while. And then the story grows, and which is what you do. I think that's putting little seeds in people's minds, or what you're trying to do, at least. It will not work on everybody, obviously, as we are cut off from nature, and most of us live in urban environments. We might take a stroll in the woods if we're lucky, and that's as far as it goes. We have lost this connection, but I don't think it's honestly, I don't think it's like waving your finger at somebody. It's more like a reminder of how it used to be, because it's in our DNA. We're part of nature, really, even though we've been cut off and don't realize it. There is memory in our serpent brain, I think. It just needs to come back. Our reptilian brain, exactly. It just needs to come back in the surface.
Yeah, and we do it's very easy to drive a very strong dichotomy here, and I think we do all still have a connection to nature. It's daft to say that we don't, because we eat food and we breathe air and all of these things, and we do all have some kind of connection to nature, but it's about strengthening it, I think, isn't it? What do
I
you
think,
think, Simona?
Simona, you have worked with kids on that aspect, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I usually sometimes I tell stories with the either the local environmental group I'm part of, or with with other at other events connected to ecology and nature. But one thing that I noticed, and it was also the question that I wanted to ask you, Lisa, because something that I found is that sometimes when I tell stories to an audience in this kind of at this kind of events, or in a woodland, something like that, is I feel like preaching to the converted.
Ah,
So how do you go about widening the group of people that you're telling to? Because I I had this realization moment a couple of years ago when we were driving. I was going to a theater with some of my friends who dance with me, and we were passing an area where they would build this great highway that I told you about earlier. And and one of them made a comment like, "Oh, they started working here as well." And at the moment, I was working with the local environmental group I'm part of to try to stop this. And and I started speaking about this. I was all heated up, and they at some point they said, "Oh, we live in one of the most urbanized areas of all of Europe," and it's a fact. It's actually I live in the area next to Milan, so it's the
okay.
plains, um, very urbanized area, and they said, "Oh no, but there's a lot of green all around the roads, because next to the roads you can see the trees, but then behind the trees there are houses and villages, and sometimes the villages are connected one to the other. There's not a green space in between villages as you could find in many other places in Italy, in other places in Europe. uh, but this is what I grew up with, and it sounded normal until I started traveling to other places and seeing that actually villages do not need to be connected to one another. There could be actually green spaces around the villages where you could go. And yes, we've got patches
Mm.
of green spaces, and but I know that they are just patches because I go there and walk and ride my bike in these kind of places, and from time to time I have to stop, and it's only a path. You pass there and then you see the village here and there, and it's all urbanized. But I realized that they didn't know it because they don't do it. And so I started talking about this, but I could see that they didn't really understand what I was talking about because they don't have that kind of connection with
Yes,
the wild places that
yes,
I have. And I this was my realization. I was like, oh no, but they don't know what I'm talking about.
yeah.
And even if I talked about that, I could see that they didn't have the same experience, so that they didn't know what was was really going on. And whereas while I tell stories at these kind of events with kids coming there, especially because their parents love being in the woods, etc.
Yeah.
I see this kind of connection, but they're there because their parents know and they grew up knowing these kind of things, but not uh, extra people don't come in, and
It can be really frustrating, can't
we
it?
struggle.
Yeah, I I'm completely with you on this. I mean, I think it's very much human nature for people who care about something to gang together and to kind of become a community, and that's just as much for nature as anything else. But it is trying to get nature connection, nature awareness out to that wider audience, and to get the stories, frankly. And I know that there is a debate raging within storytelling, as there should be, about audiences and story, and the sensitivities about a storyteller deciding which audiences should hear a story and which audiences might be the paying audience that ends up listening to the story, and where stories could be used and what audiences actually want. There's a kind of real tension, isn't there, here? So I think there's a number of different ways to tackle this. I think it is really good to keep looking for new opportunities for story to be used in different places. And in my experience, those opportunities are not going to drop themselves on the doormat. They are the ones that come through connections with somebody just happens to chance to see a storytelling or to come across something to do with this work that then makes them think, oh, actually, I'd really like that in my place, or that might work here. And then you have a conversation, or maybe someone comes along to another storytelling, and then you've got someone who's interested and they might be able to explore bringing storytelling into their bit of community. So I was at a wonderful place in the northeast of England last week, up near Newcastle, Gateshead, which has got some real problems as a place. It needs a lot of investment. Its people need a lot of love and care. And yet, right in the middle of all of the concrete and the grey and the skyscrapers and the rundown areas, there was a big community garden and a charity that was working with, specifically with refugees, actually, working with this community garden, which was a nature garden. And I was there to help run a workshop for a project that gets orchards in cities. Specifically in cities. Let's have more spaces for orchards. Let's get people involved in planting these places, caring for them, eating the fruit that comes from them. So this charity was not all about just nature, but all about very much creating a sustainable, community-driven food source. Fantastic, fantastic work. And yet we went outside in the break, and there in a nest box kind of shoved in a corner, there was a family of blue tits, the mother and the father going in and out of the nest box. All focus in on the blue tits. It was like, wow, this is amazing. And everything stopped. It was just so lovely. It was one of these places that there's such great work going on. And yet I told them an apple tree story that I often tell, and they'd not heard it before. And it was really interesting because all these people that, they come from lots of different walks of life, and they're an amazingly talented bunch of folk and very, very passionate about what they do. They are trying to get to very different audiences too, aren't they? They're trying to say to the developers, the city councils, the people who haven't got money to look after people, let alone the environment, come on, this is important. How can we work it in? And they find all manner of ways. And it was just really lovely to say, here's a story, but you tell it now. And when you say that to people and they go, oh, I can't tell stories. Go on, this is your story now. You tell it. So we need nature in cities. There's a really big need for it. There's a lot of benefits, immediately demonstrable benefits that come from that nature. Get campaigning. But also use your networks and say to people, take these stories. These are our stories. They're a matter of heritage, and we all own them. So go and tell them. Get people to spread the message. Actually challenge them to go and tell someone else that they think might enjoy this. Use community to get that message replicating and send it out. It's frustrating because you have no idea what impact you've had or whether it's made any difference at all. But I think this is one of the great hidden powers of story. If we can overcome that particularly adult block of, I'm not a storyteller, I can't do this, I can't hold this story in me without writing it down. You can demonstrate that. We've all done that, haven't we, really easily. Share them and get them sent out there. Get them out there is one of the best ways I've found. This project I've been working with on Dartmoor, East Shallowford Farm, which is a little farm in the valley, tucked away near Widdicombe in the moor. And it is a teaching farm. So you get there and you open the gate and you drive down the driveway and you hear the pigs in the barn. And you know that the school that has come from an inner city to stay there for the week and work there has probably mucked the pigs out that day. And they've been out on the moor and they've been out in the fields. And this charity, that's what they do. They get classes from inner city who've never been to the countryside before, and they get them out into nature. And there are quite a few different organisations like this. I've started doing some storytelling for them. So one evening when they've been out and about and they're all quite tired, these are kind of 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. They all collapse on the sofas and I tell them some stories. And we have a lot of fun with it. And we probably spend no more than an hour. But then we get feedback from them. Which story hit home? Which story will you remember? Which one will you tell? Getting into that kind of work, I think, is really important for story. Because again, that's the audience that doesn't hear these things that could really benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Darling, I think we're just about to
We're
end
done on
this
time, aren't we?
interview. No, we're fine. We're fine. We could have a little story if you'd like to share with us.
I have a Diddy story. I probably won't tell you the apple tree story because that
Okay.
is a long one.
Right.
And
By
it's
the way, I did look up the myth. It is Erysichthon, in case
yes,
you'd like
yes.
to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the apple tree man story it's a wassail story. It's a story of celebrating the apple trees and the turn of the year and the new year and yeah, it's good fun. It's a Somerset story. It's in Botanical Folk Tales. You can find it. Tiny little story, shortest story in the English language I've ever found. Do you want this one? Okay, so there were two farmers standing in a field, and both of them, well, farmers always have their trousers held up with string, don't they? Don't they? They were, both standing in a field. And one farmer turned to the other one and he said, "Here, I don't believe in ghosts." And the other one turned round and said, "What? I don't believe in ghosts. Load of rubbish." And so the other one just turned round to him and he said, "Oh no." And then he just disappeared.
Oh, a
I love that.
wonderful little story. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah.
No, it was not wonderful. It was horrible. Poor ghost.
Deeply deep and meaningful. I love that one.
Lovely indeed.
Brilliant. I'll go and tell that one around today.
Oh no. Poof.
Everyone will just be confused for the rest of the day. That's the way it goes.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast and sharing your passion for storytelling and nature connection with us. It was brilliant.
That's an absolute pleasure, and it's lovely talking to you both. And this itself, this podcast, is great work as well in getting stuff out there. So thank you for doing it.
We enjoy it as much as our listeners, hopefully. And we're good to connect with so many wonderful artists and so different takes on storytelling. It's been
Oh,
brilliant.
yes. It's a
Yeah.
wide and generous world. It's great stuff.
And I think it gives just a glimpse to people of how stories can be used in so many different ways,
Yeah,
especially
fantastic.
this thing you try to do, preserve our connection to nature. This is so important work. We wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we might be able to add a little, I don't know, morsel to the great pie of
Fantastic.
reading
I like that
storytelling.
pie. That's great. Well, good luck to you both as well. It's lovely to talk to you.